So I thought it would be useful to begin today by doing a bit of a reheat from a couple weeks ago, having to do with the Law of Four, because we got some depth in it, but there's a whole lot more to kind of consider. Okay, so one bar, the vertical one. Do you remember what that was called as far as a foundational goes?
I can remember that we had hot and cold and wet and dry.
Yeah, that's right. So we started off with hot and cold, and then we had wet and dry. And then what this did was it created a couple more vectors, didn't it? So hot and dry being as far as air, earth, water, or fire. Hot and dry was fire. Dry and cold was earth. Wet and cold, water. And wet and warm, air. What I want to talk about is the shift, and I'll get to the shift in just a little bit, all right? Because the law of four or the law of two, when it intersects with itself, creates this kind of solar cross of patterns in there. But from their perspective, it's two more intersections of the law of two, you see? And so the result, like fire and water become opposites, air and earth become opposites, and then it can then translate into more aspects of things. Okay, so we'll get into that. We also talked about the bull, bird, lion, and serpent. Now, do you remember which goes with which here? So,
Lime, wait, lime goes with fire.
right, let me write that here. So, fire is lion. Excellent. What's next?
I think bull was earth.
Right. Okay. Water.
Bird,
Huh?
um, hang on.
Was the serpent, I think.
Serpent. Yep.
Yes.
And then of course air. I'm going to put eagle this time. All right, and so these are other attributions that go to it. Now, let's talk a bit about the symbology of things. All right, because if you go through ancient art and ancient, you'll see it around like old churches and you know these things like griffins and these things. You know what I'm saying, right? You'll see this especially in like Gothic cathedrals, for example, implement this type of art pretty extensively in there. And I want to talk about first of all the symbol of the snake in the bowl because it has a relationship to who knows what that's supposed to be. Can you tell? It's semen. Okay, semen. Um, and very curiously, you can go back through there. There's a certain Egyptian stela or what do they call it? Was it a petroglyph? Yes, that has an image, and I can't remember which pharaoh it is, but has an image of the pharaoh ejaculating, and you can actually see coming out of the penis. You can see these images of sperm, the way that we would see them under a microscope. It makes you curious to wonder how they knew, you know, what that looked like. Very, very curious. Obviously, they knew. And so if you can accept that, and of course there's alternate explanations to it, perhaps one of those alternate explanations is true, but does look for the world like they knew what that was. Yeah. And so if you can accept that they knew a couple thousand plus years ago about that symbol for semen, then you can make the very short leap to think that perhaps they knew that that was, or they symbolized that via the snake. Okay, so so we'll say semen for snake. And then they drew the Apis bull kind of like that. It's actually where we get the letter A. I'll do it here. So here's our modern letter A. Yeah, but it used to be an upside down like this. And you can see how the two horns became that, and just over the centuries, they sort of flipped it around. It's the first letter in the alphabet because the Apis bull was what they considered the first primordial god or first primordial being. What does the if snake? represents semen, or yeah, if snake represents semen, what does the Apis bull symbol up there remind you of?
Uterus.
Yeah, the uterus. Absolutely right. If you kind of draw an outline around it, let's see if it's kind of small, isn't it? But yeah, you get this sort of shape there, obviously with the opening and all that type of stuff. But yeah, like a uterus. Okay, so now you've got this convergence of symbology. You've got the ecology in the form of the uterus or the new life appearing that is really in waiting, isn't it? Right? And then you've got the penis that ejaculates sperm into the uterus and it creates the physical foundation for something. Now, if you look at this diagram here that we drew before, you'll notice that serpent or snake and bull are both on the lower half, physical cross there. All right, they both occur down there, curiously enough. And if you look at what is on top, then you've got eagle and lion. And we'll get into that in just a little bit here. But I want you to kind of get the idea that the snake and bull represent the physical aspects of something, right? The body generates that body aspect. Now, we talked about the idea of aggregation and conformation, didn't we? And really, the best way to explain the aggregation and conformation is if you look at the genesis of a cell. When the sperm enters the egg, yeah, they're both kind of smaller, but when the sperm enters the egg, it begins a process of expansion, doesn't it? It starts to enlarge, and then it pops off into two. So you've got aggregation, it aggregates, and then breaks off into two. It confirms itself. And then those two begin to aggregate and break off into four. You begin already at the very start of life to get this aggregation and conformation aspect of things. I want you to understand too that we're not just talking about this scenario. Okay, we're trying to open up the laws in a certain way so that you can begin to apply them across multiple domains. Yeah? If you want to understand the process of a personal development journey, for example, then you can take this idea of aggregation and conformation as a template. We begin to, like you're doing now, you begin to aggregate this body of knowledge having to do with the law of four. And this is the aggregation phase of things. Yeah? And then I say, okay, go find examples of it. And you split out into conformation. Right? You've got this idea, this aggregated notion of the law of four within yourself. It's hot, cold, wet, dry, bull, bird, lion, serpent, and whatnot. That's part of you. To confirm it, you go outside of yourself. You look at things in nature. For example, you look at the four seasons, which very easily you can find in there. You know the four seasons as they apply to here? Let's go through it. Just we'll aggregate you a little bit more, okay? And then you can find your own examples. But hot and dry, summer. Dry and cold, autumn or fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wet and cold, winter. And wet and warm,
Spring.
spring. Yeah, exactly. So it really does go everywhere. And looking at nature is a great place to start to begin that confirmation phase of things. You can even look at sicknesses. You know, sometimes you have a hot and dry cough, like a cough with a fever, don't you? Sometimes you have dry and cold, where you've got a cough and chills. And cold and wet, you have a phlegmy cough and chills, and the warm, warm and wet. You get the idea, don't you? That it's not just one thing. Really, you can pretty much find this sort of thing anywhere. All right. So is this aspect clear?
Yes.
Something aggregating in you about it, and I really do hope that you take this. I wouldn't call it homework, maybe life work, okay, but or groundwork if you prefer. But we do hope that you take this to heart and begin to try to do this process of confirmation for yourself. It's a very important aspect of this journey is not to just listen to the well, I would call myself an inspirator and you are conspirators. Yeah. Understand the difference, right? I'm trying to cause inspiration. And if you've got the reference for CON or carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, conspiration means that you've got an inner process going. Yeah. So I'm trying to inspire, and you need to get that get that inspiration in yourselves. So I'll be an inspirator from now on. You're conspirators, not to a crime, but all right. So yeah, kind of making sense so far.